Thank you, Mr. Girton, for being here with us today and your long years of service at the federal level. When you're talking about the coastal program, and you've talked about partnerships with, the chairman was talking about the foundation, how do you weave that into private landowners and those kinds of other partners that could be involved or would be affected by what you might be moving forward with at the coastal program?
Thank you for your question, Senator. We're talking about non-regulatory voluntary programs here, and that's an approach we try to employ whenever we can. We try to establish a vision for a landscape. We reach out and work very closely with our state counterparts, state fish and game agencies, the tribes and other jurisdictions. And then with private landowners, we have several effective programs, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, our private lands program, or the coastal program, where we build trust and confidence up over time. Some of it at the kitchen table, some of it at local forums, some of it working with the Farm Service Agency and others to try and generate interest in conservation. In many cases, private landowners approach us. We can use these programs as a front porch for people to talk about a shared vision and then work with them on fulfilling some of their conservation needs as well as some of ours. But we really use a model of trying to bring people to the table and look toward convening authorities, many of which are already in existence, and we can just turn to those and bring some of the capacity and bring capacity from other federal agencies like Farm Service Administration, NRCS, and others, and some of the BIL funding is a great example as well, to bring it to the table and pursue a shared vision for conservation on the landscape.
Great, thank you. Thank you, that's good. In considering the Coastal Habitat Conservation Act, are there changes to the program that you think would improve its implementation? And, in every program, not just this one, but any program in any bailiwick, certainly we want to eliminate any kind of possibility of duplicative programming, that might be coming out of one pocket, but it's serving the same person. It sort of dilutes the purpose if you keep separating it out into different programs. Do you have any suggestions there?
We see the coastal program authorized under the Coastal Habitat Conservation Act as pretty effective right now. We have a lot of flexibilities. We believe getting it codified with its own authorities would be enormously helpful going forward. That'll give us a kind of a stronger mandate. Setting these new fund targets or authorized funding levels will help us internally with Department OMB advocating for budget increases, and think it'll give Congress a lot more oversight, getting a clear reporting and chain of command from us into how we're executing the program on the ground. We work very closely with this program and our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, private lands program, to try and have a more consistent approach on the landscape. And our field employees are great. They take off the bowling shirt, and when landowners and others come up to talk to them, they're not representing the coastal program or the Partners program. They're representing Fish and Wildlife Service and the consortium of land managers on the landscape to try and hammer out that shared vision and try to forge common sense solutions going forward.
Thank you. And just for my own education here, you're talking about, we codified the maps last, I think I said, in 2018. You said this is 400 maps that would be codified, the most ever. Just elementarily, how does that affect what you do?
Thanks for your question, Senator. This Hurricane Sandy remapping project, as well as the smaller units we updated in about 6 other states, are an enormous undertaking. It's about a third of the acreage of the Cobra will be impacted as well. It's really going to provide a lot of certainty and answer a lot of questions to homeowners who have advocated for several years. They were erroneously included in the Cobra boundaries, and using new technology, we're able to clean up some of those. It's also going to give Congress, I think, a clean slate to start the program afresh with more consistent interpretation and application of where the delineation of the boundaries is. And it actually adds several 100,000 acres as well to Cobra, which will further provide additional strong natural habitat to resist storms, absorb a lot of that energy, provide great habitat. So it's a revolutionary accomplishment, and I think a game changer for coastal conservation if Congress were to move forward and enact this legislation and codify these map revisions into law.
Okay, so final question, would that be an equivalent to, say, a FEMA flood map or something of that nature, that inland, that's what we deal with?
So what our maps do, Senator, if they're enacted into law, is they delineate the boundaries of the Coastal Barrier Resource Act. If any acreage or structures are included inside those, they're not eligible for federal flood insurance. So again, they can still go ahead and develop, but they have to use non-federal funding or seek insurance elsewhere. So it's a market-based disincentive.
Interplays with that.
Yeah. So interplays with both of those.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Start with you. Ms. Cope, you mentioned in your statements the coordination that you do with Ducks Unlimited and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Can you give me some other examples of partnerships that you have that have been particularly successful, and are those partnerships growing, and how that impacts your ability to move forward with these programs?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Mm-hmm. So in utilizing coastal program funding, one of the projects we did was enhancing black rail habitat on private lands. And so the coastal program was able to provide funding for us to go in and treat some native or some vegetation that was deteriorating the quality of wood stork habitat, as well as increasing predation on wood storks. So without the coastal program funding and the participation of private landowners, we would not have been able to do that project, and we would not have been able to increase the wood stork nesting that's in South Carolina. So private landowners provide a critical partner in some of the things we do. In addition, when we utilized one of our national coastal wetlands conservation projects, one of our properties was Samworth Wildlife Management Area. We went in and did some major renovations. We had tremendous storm damage, as well as just dealing with effects of higher tides impacting the berms and impoundments. In that, Ducks Unlimited was a partner, but we also partnered with Audubon, South Carolina, as well as the Open Space Institute, who brought resources and technical expertise to the table. They donated those as in-kind contributions, and through that, we were able to retop 7,780 linear feet of dike, as well as 13,425 linear feet of interior canal restoration, 1,460 linear feet of interior setback dike, and thereby enhancing also 2,560 linear feet of berm along those eroded dikes, as well as installing 4 trunks and water control structures. So because these other partners were willing to come to the table, share their resources and their technical expertise, we were able to develop a project that would enhance these wetland areas for not only wintering waterfowl, but many other non-game species and many species of concern.
Well, great. I know South Carolina, having been to the South Carolina coast myself, it has a beautiful and very great beaches, and I know that because of that, there's a lot of infrastructure, hotels, people, and recreationists who want to enjoy those areas. How do you balance that when you're looking at the conservation aspects with the infrastructure needs and just the human love of your coasts?
Thank you. That is a great question and a huge challenge for us, because our natural resources and our coastal ecosystems are a tremendous draw to our state.
Right.
And oftentimes when people come to visit, they determine that it is a wonderful place to live. So we do have just under a 200-mile coastline, and there are significant development pressures along that coastline. What we've tried to do is to utilize funding of our partners, as well as our own internal agency funding and programs, to identify those areas that are most significant and to try to protect those areas in perpetuity. Our goal is not only to manage them to enhance natural resources, but to open them up for public use and enjoyment. We believe that people will conserve what they appreciate and what they love, and so by providing them these public areas, by protecting the resources on these areas and managing them for not only water quality but numerous fish and wildlife species, we can instill a conservation ethic and a passion for conservation in not only our citizens, but also our visitors. So in hopes that when they go back home, even if they don't move to South Carolina, they'll support conservation back in their own states.
Right. So you have a 200-mile coastline. If you were to put a percentage, or let's say a 1 to 10 scale, of repairs that have been made, what else needs to be done? Are you at a 7? Are you at a 10 but constantly redoing? Or are you at a 1 where you're, which I know you're not at a 1, so we can eliminate that. But if you understand the point of my question is how much more work is there to be done? Or is it I know it's a constant reassessment of where you are, but there's certainly got to be places that still are in great need.
Absolutely, and this is really an off-the-cuff estimate. So I would say we are probably at a 6 or a 7. We have been incredibly successful at moving the needle on restoration projects as well as habitat protection projects, but there is still a lot to be done, especially on private lands. But one of the biggest challenges we have is dealing with climate change and just the effects of Mother Nature. So it is a continuous effort. The dikes on our impoundments continue to settle and wear away, and as well as managing invasive species.
Right.
So we're never finished.
Right.
And, but we are committed to the task, and we'll continue to move the needle and do all that we can.
Well, good. Let me ask one other question, because this came up in our when we were considering the transportation bill that we very successfully put together for the big infrastructure bill, which were and I think Senator Graham, this was an area of concern for him, the exit routes of in the Myrtle Beach area for hurricane evacuation. Do you work with the DOT, your state DOT? Are you a part of that strategy that the state's has tried to put together to make sure people can be safe?
Yes, ma'am. I have not worked with those individuals directly, but as an agency, we do have staff who work with them. Mm-hmm. And a couple of key things we look at, one would be the routes of the proposed interstate,
right,
making sure that we minimize impacts to natural resources, but also identifying proper mitigation alternatives. So while we work very hard to protect our natural resources, we understand needs of public safety and transportation, and we are known for working with our partners and our sister state agencies to try to find a balance and minimize impacts but meet the needs of our citizens. So one of our primary focuses has been assuming funding for I-73 or other roads go into effect. How can we protect land in other areas and mitigate the impacts of those?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mm-hmm.